Everyone, welcome to the Afterlife podcast. This is your host, Pooja Chilakuri. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Sherianna Boyle, who is the founder of the Emotional Detox Coaching Program, the creator of the C.L.E.A.N.S.E method, and the author of the Emotional Detox book series. Her most recent book is Energy in Action: The Power of Emotions and Intuitions to Cultivate Peace and Freedom. Her book, The Four Gifts of Anxiety, was endorsed by the National Association of Mental Health. Sherianna is also the host of the Just Ask Spirit podcast. She's a yoga teacher. She's also an adjunct professor of psychology. And above all, she's mom to three amazing daughters. And with all the hats that you're wearing, Sherianna, you've taken the time to be on this show. So welcome and thank you.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. My pleasure.
Yes. So, I first found out about your work through another guest of mine. His name is Mark Anthony. He goes by the title of psychic lawyer. And when he introduced me to your work, when I landed on your website, I said, "Oh my goodness, this woman is speaking my language," because I'm also in the health and wellness space. But the thing that really intrigued me was all these books you've written. In my eyes landed on the book, the Emotional Detox, the 7 steps on, finding joy. So the first question I have for you is, what prompted you to write a whole series of books on emotions?
Yeah. Well, there was just a natural curiosity. I actually wrote Emotional Detox after I wrote a book called Mantras Made Easy. And when I wrote a Mantras Made Easy, I was doing mantra practices on a regular basis. I still have mantra practices, but when I was writing that book, I had like 3. I was really dedicated. And at the same time, I was struggling in my marriage, and it just kind of came to me. Let's see, I did a 90-day mantra practice at the end of the 90 days. And one of the mantras, by the way, was for truth. At the end of the 90 days, I had this just came to me. It was like emotional detox.
Mhm.
Um, Emotional detox. Why am I thinking of emotional I'm going to write a book on emotional detox. And I remember talking to my friend who's an editor. I was like, I think I'm going to write a book on emotional detox. She was like, that sounds great. That sounds really great. I like that, right? So I wrote it out. I did the research. I pitched it to Simon Schuster. They loved it. They were like, great, we're going to move forward. Literally 5 weeks from the time I got the hit, you're going to write this book, to doing the research. 5 weeks later, I get hit with the most traumatic emotional news of my life, my entire life. And my life hasn't been a bed of roses. And I was like, oh my God, um, I can't write this book. I'm a mess. Like I have no business writing this. I went to the publisher. I said, I can't write this book. I need an emotional detox. I, and they were great. And I'm so blessed because they said, take as much time as you need. They removed all the deadlines, and they said, when you're ready, you will write it. And that's how it happened. And then it just was a flood of information. And then I wrote Emotional Detox for Anxiety, Emotional Detox Now, and then Energy in Action, which is the latest book, which is also about emotions and flow, but it relates to manifesting.
And I can tell because I've been reading your book, Emotional Detox, the 7 steps to release toxicity and energize joy. And I can tell that this is not a person who's writing from her head. I could tell that comes through in your book. So,
Um,
just to kind of get an idea, so for the viewers and the listeners, what is emotional detox?
Well, that was a good question. And when I was looking around, I saw people would mention it maybe in an article or maybe in a program, but no one really developed it. So I decided somebody's got to kind of develop what is an emotional detox exactly. And so I decided to create a foundation based on these core principles. One is your emotions matter, processing them matters more. So I'll say that again. Your emotions matter, processing them matters more. The second is all your emotions are good and when I say good, I mean valuable,
Mhm.
so long as they're processed. Even the shame, even the guilt, even the fear, they're all good so long as they're processed. And the third principle is we are not getting rid of your emotions in an emotional detox. And that's where I find a lot of people talk about getting rid of negative emotions or fearful emotions. What we are removing, detoxing, is reactivity. The way
Mhm.
we react to our emotions, which is the way we minimize, suppress, oppress. And we do this in numerous ways, which I talk about in Emotional Detox and all the other books. And so once we clear that, then the emotions, like, then they get to be free. And then they
Mhm.
get to give us what they're designed to give us, which there's so much that they give us. I'm still learning about how amazing emotions are.
Yeah. You mentioned something very important, I think. So I'm going to say it again, that you said our emotions are valuable.
Mm,
Because, I'm used to thinking of certain emotions being like bad or negative, but all of it is valuable, right? So
mm.
that's something beautiful, Shariana. And how, what would be an example of how we process an emotion, say anything like fear or anxiety, or um,
Mm.
how will we even begin to process something like that?
Well, that was the other thing I found. So when I did the research, is like, well, no one really there's practices and mindful practices that
Hmm.
support that. Like, for example, breathing is a way that we can experience an emotion and we can move an emotion and we can, and a lot of people will say sort of sit with emotion and feel it in your body and detach from the labels, and those practices are wonderful. They do take dedication. I designed a process, and that's called cleanse.
Hmm.
And cleanse is featured in all my emotional detox books. It's also featured in Energy and Action for Manifesting. And that is a 7 steps, because I find we start processing, and that's great, but we do need to sort of there the steps of cleanse I channeled during my personal emotional detox. So it's an acronym, and it stands for C, clear reactivity, L, look inward, E, emit, A, activate joy, N is nourish, S is surrender, E is ease. And each one is a mindful step, and they flow into each other. So the S, the surrender, is at the bottom, because by the when you do those 5 steps ahead of it, by the time you get to S, you'll have no problem surrendering. So we do those 7 steps. Cleanse is the acronym for emotional processing, which takes less than 10 minutes.
Hmm. And so when you speak of like the cleanse method or processing your emotions, is there like a telltale sign? Like, how do we know we need something like that? When should we do it? Like, how do we know that, now this emotion needs to be processed?
Yeah. So I talk a lot about reactivity in my books, and reactivity is how I define that is how you make the uncomfortable comfortable.
Mm,
Okay, so I'll say that again. A reaction is how do I make the uncomfortable comfortable? And there's all sorts of ways we do that, even ways that appear fine, right? Appear positive. It sometimes I can almost be too positive, right? Meaning
yeah.
people, they're like, oh, look at the bright side. Sometimes that's their way of not feeling,
Hmm.
right? So it's
Hmm.
whatever sort of stops the feeling in its tracks. And so how do you know? Okay, well, I was just talking to my I have 3 daughters, one's 15, and I was asking her, there's like something that she's stressed that really bothers her. Okay, really kind of she's working through. Let's put it that way. And I said to her, okay, and I have this in my books, by the way, um, where are you at in terms of your levels of reactivity? And then I explained it. Okay. Okay. Level one of reactivity would be I'm aware I have tools, right? Tools and strategies like breathing, like going for a walk, like kind of, having getting support from a loved one or something, and I'm using them, right? I'm turning to them. Maybe I'm drinking water or I'm doing yoga, whatever it is. I'm aware I have tools and I'm using level 1 reactivity. Level 2 reactivity is I I'm aware that I have tools. I'm in a reaction, which is like a trigger, but I'm not using my tools, right? But I know they're there, right? I know that I could journal or whatever it is but I'm not choosing to use them. Level 3 levels of reactivity is I am so in it. Tools are the furthest from my radar. I'm just in full blown triggered response. And that is where I'm not even in my body. Perhaps I'm numbing, perhaps I'm impulsive. I'm in this high level state of reactivity. So I encourage people to sort of do that little check-in, right? Now, when do we? I think it's best if it's a daily practice and you don't wait for whatever to hit the fan. You don't wait until you're like, oh my gosh, I need an emotional detox, right? You do it every single day because you've got to build a relationship with your body and your emotions.
Yes. Thank you for explaining that so beautifully, Sherianna. That is something that I am getting from your book. I have to tell you, I haven't finished reading it. I love to read.
Oh,
I just started with I'm still going through the whole cleanse method in your book. And I said to myself, this is not a book you read. This is a book you do.
yes,
Because there's so
yes.
many tools in this book. And like you said, it's a daily practice because we are caught off guard usually when we're triggered and we're reacting. So I know that really helps. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about personally, I'm very curious because I interview a lot of folks that have had out of body experiences, near death experiences, and they all talk about the state of joy and ease. And you talk about that in your book. So the question I have for you is, and when they return, it's like this sharp contrast. And some of us are empaths, we already are, where we feel the oneness of all things. And yet it's so hard to function without boundaries in this world. Do you have any comments on boundaries? How do you do boundaries?
Well, yeah, I mean, I have a solid, so Energy in Action is probably the book that I'm connected to the most right now because I've gotten those building blocks, and it's not that you can't start with Energy in Action. And I really turn to the practices in that book, which again follows the cleanse, but
Mhm.
also introduces the healing. And what it does is it connects you to your spirit, right? So when I move emotions, the intention is to connect me to my spirit, because when we're having trouble with boundaries, well, a couple things I've found in working with clients, they're having a hard time knowing what their heart says, and they're having a hard time knowing what their head says, and they're wondering which one to follow. Like, do I follow my heart? Do I follow my head? And it creates all this confusion, so they do nothing. Like, my head says, set a boundary, right? Don't let this person treat you like that, right? But my heart says, oh, have compassion, and I feel bad, and I feel guilty, and I'm supposed to be a loving, right? So there's that like dichotomy between in the head. And I say, yeah, I get your heart saying that, and I get your head saying that, but what does your spirit say? Right. And that's where Energy and Action comes in. Yeah, it's different. It takes that cleanse and it brings it into, let's connect you to spirit and those frequencies. And now let's see. And I go to that place. So I'll go in and literally do the practices from Energy and Action, and I'll expand in the spirit, and the spirit will come up with solutions and that I just wasn't even aware of, and the spirit understands, that the mind will say, well, these steps need to happen, but spirit is so creative. You're connected, everybody is. There's such a creative space there, and it will sort of shape itself, so because it's like trying on a shoe that fits. You're like, you know what? that works for me. I could see myself setting boundaries in that way. So I always connect to spirit for that. I do have sort of these negotiables and non-negotiables in boundary setting. For example, I never make a decision, especially a big one, or have a conversation without cleansing first.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because then I could be doing it off reactivity.
Yes.
So I have my own personal boundaries, which will help, right? And people know that about me. They
Yes.
know, they don't push me because
Yes.
they know that it's pretty consistent that I will say, okay, I'm going to process this. And
Mm-hmm.
that's my way of saying, I'm going to go sit and cleanse,
Yes.
feel my, remove the reactivity, feel my emotions. I'm going to connect to spirit. And then I'm going to, with discernment and honor for and integrity for myself and everybody else involved, then I'm going to decide how to move forward.
That's actually great advice. Great advice. And that actually brings me to my next question. You mentioned your book Energy in Action. Can you tell us a little bit what that title intrigues me? What does that even mean?
Yeah, so again, I feel like emotional detox is growing up. Okay? So emotional detox, a core book, which I is like the core mama foundation. So if you want to know the one you're reading, emotional detox is going to tell you what this is all about. It's going to give you that foundation. And then it grew up, right? And it's like, okay, let's talk about anxiety. Let's talk about the now book has, oh my gosh, I can't remember how many practices in that book. Um, Energy in Action looks at the spiritual laws of the universe, and it reminds us that we're spiritual beings first. The subtitle of that book is The Power of Emotions and Intuition and Flow. So now when you start moving your emotions, right, and your intuition's going to go up and your ability to connect to spirit is going to increase. And what I do is teach people how to align with the spiritual laws to manifest things in their, whatever it is that you're looking to create in your life. And I found that so many of the practices and the teachings around manifesting were very heavily focused, what you focus on expands kind of thing, right? That if you want to, attract something, the law of attraction, then you got to focus on these thoughts. And I thought to myself, why is everybody going in through thoughts when there's a complete avenue where we can go through that and we can bring in through emotions. So I completely took it from that angle, and the spiritual laws are the guide, and then created specific emotional cleanses so that you land in your highest spiritual self.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's what Energy in Action offers. And we can
That,
talk more about the manifesting part if you want.
yeah, I do have a question about that because that word gets used a lot. And I know it probably means different things to different people. And I've never heard anyone say that it was through emotions. Like that's where you're getting at, right? Erasing your emotional energy, I guess. So that's the first time I've heard of that. So that's a very interesting perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, manifesting, first of all, we're always manifesting something. It's not, I think sometimes we get the impression like we turn it on and off, and there's no on off button. We are manifesting creative beings, and we're always creating something. It might not just be what we want, but so I think to myself, if I feel like I don't have something, right? Or I'm missing something, then aren't I already a little bit in a state of reactivity,
Yes.
right? I mean, I don't know what you think, Pooja, about that, but if I think to myself, I don't have, right? Then I'm already a little bit in a reactive state, right?
Yes.
So my message is, again, cleanse that, right? So, when I think about, when I see other people with a partner, or when I see my bills or when I look at my bank account, it makes me feel and go through the cleanse process and start to process some of those emotions, because what will happen as that energy moves and start to release that reactivity, which is going to be a lot of stories and narratives like I'm not good enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm old, whatever they are, start to move that energy, which is the cleanse, and then land in that space where you're connected fully to spirit.
Mhm.
Then I want you to pay attention to what you're creating. And this is the interesting part, Pooja, is after you move through the cleanse, what you're creating, not only do you get more clear on what you're going to be focusing on, but it often shifts.
Mhm.
Oh, it's really not about that.
Yeah.
I'm really, maybe perhaps what I'm creating is stability. Maybe perhaps what I'm creating is trust.
Yes.
Maybe perhaps what I'm creating is commit is a commitment,
Yeah.
right? Or freedom.
Yes.
That's what I'm going to be focusing. So it sort of shifts you and shapes you organically. Things
Yeah.
will go out of order, but
Yeah.
they will go back into order. It is energy, and you have to learn to work with your spiritual essence and trust it's all happening for you.
For a good reason. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know you do a lot of work with people, helping them, with the cleanse method. Where can we find, what's the best way to reach you to find out about your classes? I'm going to include all your links in the show
Oh,
notes, but yeah, it's,
thank you.
yeah,
Sheriannaboyle.com
okay.
is where everything is. My books, I have an energy and action course. I have the podcast, Just Ask Spirit, there, and anything else, private work, all that is there. And retreats. I do retreats. If
Yes.
anyone wants to get away.
And your books, I know I found mine on Amazon, but are they going to be available everywhere
Oh
where
yeah.
like
Yeah, anywhere. Yeah, they're
anywhere?
all traditionally published, so generally that helps with distribution. Yeah.
That's awesome. And I don't want to, I want to keep you, I just want to keep talking, but we're running out of time. Is there anything that you want to share with us, like a favorite practice that you have? Because your class method has several tools. I get that, like from what I'm reading, but is there one that's your favorite?
Um, yeah. I really stick with the cleanse, I'm going to be honest with you, because there's so many, I don't get bored because there's variations of it,
Yes.
and I'm still creating variations all the time. So
Yeah.
I use the same structure, and I believe that's important because I'm also a adjunct psychology professor. So
Yep.
I'm a big fan of things have to be consistent to change the brain,
Mhm.
right? You don't want to keep changing up what your practice is. It's okay to add variations,
Mhm.
right? Like a workout, you would
Yep.
do a work out different muscles in different ways. That's kind of what the cleanse does. So that's why I write so many books on it, because you're going to be familiar with the structure, and you're going to go, oh, I get this. I know how to do this. But what's fun is you're going to get different variations.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's like the cleanses and emotional detox now are completely different than the ones in energy and action.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that, Sherianna. And thank you
Yeah,
so much for taking the time
I
to
know we're.
speak with us today. Thank you. Thank you for coming on this
Thank
show.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.